Hello and welcome to Not That This, the pop culture talk show where I interview artists and influencers to find out their fool's gold and hidden gems. Those massively popular things that they hate and those unknown or underrated masterpieces that they love. My name's Geraint Evans and I am your host. So, episode 21, and today I'm speaking to Nikesh Shukla, who is an author of many brilliant and funny books and quite a prominent figure, I suppose, for his work as the editor on The Good Immigrant. Now, I actually emailed Nikesh before this podcast had even started, before I'd launched. Beyond my admiration for his work, I found that when speaking to my wonderful arty friends about this idea, this podcast, I was told by several different people that I had to get Nikesh on. And then the podcast started and more people told me I needed to have him on. Now, that hasn't happened with anyone else, and it shows, I think, his reputation as not just a fantastic artist, but also someone prominent with a certain amount of success who's willing to put himself out there and dedicate his time to other artists and help them. I think that's pretty rare, I think that's pretty special. So I was delighted when he responded to me and we could set this up. I was actually really nervous talking to him, and that does not happen often at all. But it's a great episode. Here's the interview. Hello, Nikesh.
Hello.
You seem very tired today.
Yeah, I've got baby.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah. Baby was a particularly difficult baby last night.
Right. Okay.
I was, as we record this, I've just walked out of the cinema, having seen The Last Jedi at like a 10 a.m. screening, and my mission last night was to finish all my work and then treat myself to The Force Awakens, just to kind of get back in the mode, know where everyone is, know where all the players are. But between the hours of 10 p.m. and at midnight, which was when I was planning to watch it, my baby decided to be really unsettled, and I didn't want my other child or wife to wake up.
Ah, well, that's nice of you.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, very tired.
I mean, that's fair enough. So I've been trying to work out what you are. Like, your website says you're a writer, but you do everything.
I mean, I have done a lot of stuff. I've tried a lot of different things. So, like, you know, I've tried doing my own podcast. I've tried stand-up. I spent my 20s trying to be a rapper, but I wasn't very good at being a rapper, so I stopped being a rapper. But writer is the most consistent thing I do. I guess the thing with writers these days is, like, if you want to have a sustainable career, like, it's hard to just write books. So, like, I write books, but also, like, I write journalism and I write essays for journals and I write for TV, and, like, if I need money, I'll pitch to, like, do copywriting stuff or, like, write to brief. And I have a day job. Well, I currently have a day job where I mentor young people to write a magazine in Bristol, where I live, called Rife. And so I guess I mentor a lot of writers as well.
That's cool. I mean, what's it like being the editor of a magazine specifically for like teenagers? Like, as a man who's not a teenager. Like...
Yeah, it's funny because I think when I turned 35 when I was in the job, like, I'm 37 now, and my wife sort of joked at the time that apparently that is the year that you stop discovering new music. But because I work on a youth magazine, and, like, the young people who tend to come and work with us are always really into grime. I'm always listening to a lot of grime, and I think my wife sort of thinks that that's just me clinging on a little bit to my youth. But working with young people is really inspiring. Like, it teaches me a lot about how to tell stories that are relevant to young people now, how to sort of conjure up the universal using modern, like, contemporary storytelling methods. I also find that young people are so much more politically progressive than I am, because, like, you know, certainly with the young people we work with, like, their sense of identity and the way, like, the sort of identity politics isn't an add-on for them, it's just very innate to their nature. In the same way that, you know, I'm not a digital native because I was born in 1980, so I've, like, grown up with the internet, but I've grown up learning the internet rather than like it being native to me. So like they are digital natives, and they are like identity politics is innate to a lot of young people, and so I find that their politics is so much more progressive than mine. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, and brilliant, whenever I go to youth groups, the first thing everyone does is introduce themselves and the pronouns that they would prefer to be called by. And wow. I think that's amazing. Like, it's never just been that open and transparent that's how people want to be referred to. And it's inspired me to write YA stuff, so I've got my first YA book coming out next year. I find it really inspiring. I think it's important, having been a writer from a marginalised background who's kind of felt there have been times where I've been held back, not because of the strength of my writing. I'm always more than happy for people to say your writing is not that good, because that is fair enough. But where there have been instances where I've been held back because of, say, my skin colour, I think it's really important, now that I am published, that I continue to stand up for people who are marginalised. And so I find that mentoring young storytellers and kind of keeping the next generation of storytellers going and feeling like they can contribute and their stories are valid and vital is like a large part of why I do what I do.
Great. So you're sort of most famous maybe for The Good Immigrant?
Yeah, completely. I will take that. Like, that changed my life. That changed my career.
Wow, okay.
In ways that I never anticipated. Like, I never anticipated that book would do what it did, and it's been brilliant. You know, it's sort of there's a strange conflict in my head that it's a book that shouldn't need to really exist. And you know, it's just, you know, talking about race and racism is exhausting and wearing, and yet that is what I find myself the majority of my life doing. But I think it's opened doors for me to continue to do the things that I've always wanted to do. So, like, I've always, you know, since working at Rife, I've wanted to write for young adults, which is something I'm doing in the next year. My adult novel that's coming out in April is, when I was 19 years old, I tried to write this novel. It read like a 19-year-old had written it. Yeah. I then tried to write it again. I couldn't do it, so I wrote Coconut Limited. I then tried to write it again. I couldn't do it, so I wrote Meat Space. And then I wrote something else after Meat Space. There's like a full-length third novel manuscript in my proverbial desk, in my electronic desk, called Wild Loaves. Okay. Which is like another like funny, whimsical, kind of self-deluded guy sort of learns a bit about himself, kind of thing. Like, in the mode that my first two novels very much are. And I wrote it and I was like, yeah, I wrote this because this novel that I've been trying to write since I was 19 years old I wrote it as a distraction. I should be writing that. So I sat down and finally wrote that novel. And, you know, so while that's happening, like, The Good Immigrant is doing what it's doing, but like while like lots of opportunities have kind of come my way, I feel like it hasn't detracted me, or it hasn't changed what I'm want to write.
Right, yeah. So, like, I'm sort of interested in the book. Like, when you're collecting a number of essays, sort of the editor becomes a feature, right, of the book. Like, in a way that, you know, you will have an editor for your novels as well, but it's not like on the cover. So what is the process of, like, how involved are you in the process from like the conception to the?
Well, I guess it's an interesting curatorial role that you're playing. And like, it's essentially like a gatekeeping role, and you could have 5 different editors be set the same brief, and we would have all come up with different versions of that book. Yeah. And, you know, that book is that book because of my tastes and like the things that I write and the types of writers I gravitate towards because of the things that I write. And I hold my hand up, like, it's not meant to be the be all and end all of. Oh yeah. And like, I chose, like, I approached loads of writers because they were the types of writers who I really love, and the writers in the book are like the ones who turn their essays in. And interestingly, like, some of the feedback is a bit like, Like, one review was sort of saying that it felt like it wasn't academic enough, and I was like, I don't want to write an academic book. Like, that's not me. Like, lots of people commented on how funny it was, but I'm a comedy writer, so like I'm gonna ask Nish Kumar, and like I know that Riz Ahmed is one of the funniest people I know, and you know Bir Madawimni is also one of the funniest writers I know, and so on and so forth. Like, it was always going to be funny because of the stuff that I like. But when I was approaching writers, like my job, because like the point of it was to kind of give writers the space to tell a story that they really want to tell.
Yeah.
In their own words, unapologetically, in the way that they want to tell it. And so my job is to basically go, okay, cool, here's the platform, do what you want, and I'll get out of your way, and then I'll kind of check in with you when you've got a draft, and we'll kind of navigate it towards where it needs to be. And also, like, I think had my curatorial role been a bit too much, like, I want this to be a political manifesto, and I'm going to choose everyone, like, one person from one community and one person from another community, like, it would have I'd have failed. Like, you can't be all representative, that's impossible. And my feeling was I didn't want this to be a political manifesto. I wanted this to be a project about raising the profile of some really great BAME writers. Like, it wasn't supposed to be a post-Brexit comment on immigration. And if it was, I probably would have looked at who I was choosing a bit more. Like, I would have probably, found like some Eastern European writers and so on and so forth. But it was what it was, and I'm not answering your question, but yeah. So like my job was to kind of, like, some writers needed some direction. I kind of approached it like I do my mentoring. So like, okay, it's all about being quite reflective. So like, and reflecting back. So if a writer says, "What do you want me to write?" you kind of go, "Well, what would you like to write?" Well, I don't know. I was thinking something about blah 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 blah. So you want to write about blah 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 blah? Yeah, I really do. And then right. Okay, but at that point, they really own it, and they feel like they really want to do it. I mean, some people who, like, writing isn't their natural lane, so I had a lot more involvement in the editing of their work. Like people like Riz and Himesh, like, they're actors, so I was there to kind of not hold their hand, but like with Riz, I sent him lots and lots of stuff to read. And he asked if his first draft could just be a real jumble, and I could then like help him assemble it, which I did. And then once I like helped him to assemble it, he the next draft was pretty much perfect, because he kind of like, that's just the obsessive way he works. With Himesh, it was about, I think he's never written anything like this before, so it was very much about trying to get him to not feel like he had to tell it every story, but on his own, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it was interesting. But then you kind of had the heightened thing around, like, the hype around the crowdfunding and the rush to get it ready and all that kind of stuff. It was pretty full on few months. Yeah, I mean, it's done pretty well though, so worth it. But like every book, you kind of look back at it and go, "Oh, I wish we could have done that with this," or like. I mean, that's the creative process, isn't it? Like, someone once said they attributed it to Oscar Wilde, and I've never looked it up, so forgive me if this is wrong, but apparently books are never finished, they're only abandoned. Yeah, that's the exact quote I was thinking of just. Is it Oscar Wilde? I'm not sure. Probably. He gets all the quotes. Him or Churchill. Yeah. So you've got 2 books coming out this year, or within the next year. So you've got a young adult book, and then like a. I've got a very full slate for the next year. So I've got 2 novels. I've got The One Who Wrote Destiny, which is like a big family novel, the one that I've been trying to write since I was 19. I've got Run Riot, which is a YA book, which is like a martial arts thriller about gentrification. I'm in for that. Towards the end of the year, I've done an educational book about race, what race is and what racism is for kids, which I'm working on with Claire Houchen. I've just helped to co-edited a collection of essays written by young people for Unbound, which is based around the youth magazine I edit, called Rife. That'll be out hopefully next year. The sequel to The Good Immigrant is a series of 4 journals where we kind of get writers to not just write about race and immigration, but kind of write whatever they want to write, and that's called The Good Journal, and so those will be coming out in the next year. Oh, right.
This is a big slate.
Yeah, and I've got like two short stories and 2 anthologies and like 1 thing that I've just done for Audible as well. So like,
okay,
it's a pretty full on 12 months. But like 2019, I'm going to take off and only have 2 books out.
Right. Because, that's taking it off for you.
Well, yeah, in 2019, we're doing the Good Immigrant USA, and that's coming out early 2019, and then at some point in 2019 my second YA will come out if I can ever find the time to write it. But I've got a really good idea for what I want to do with that.
Okay. Well, I mean, so are you editing the Good Immigrant USA as well, or?
Yeah, I'm co-editing it with so one of the contributors, who's also my best mate, Shemen Suleiman. She lives in New York, so she's like much better placed to to work it through than I am. But I've been really instrumental in like getting together the lineup, which is sick. I really can't wait to talk about it. We're still in the stage of like people have said yes, but then they might not. There's still wiggle room for them to go actually no. But so I don't want to announce anything just yet.
That's fair enough. Yeah,
so she'll be doing a lot of the editing, and I'll kind of just be overseeing it.
Okay, all right. So I mean, you write a lot of fiction, right? Like, what is it? Like, what do you love about it? Like writing a book, because a book is a big endeavour, right? Like it becomes your life while you write it, right? What drives you to do that? To put that investment in time, like to tell that story when you could potentially write a script for a TV show that might tell the same story?
It's a good question. I don't know if I have like a tangible answer for it. I love fiction, and I want to kind of throw my hat into the fiction ring.
Fair enough.
And I'm kind of writing books that I wish I could have read. So books that I feel like, while I was spending years only seemingly being able to find and read books about like creative writing professors who like fuck all their students and they make it sad for 400 pages, like Jonathan Franzen style books and like Charles Bukowski style bullshit and all that kind of stuff, like just because I couldn't find stuff that I wanted to read, like, and it's only now like doing all the work around inclusion that I kind of get to go back and go, oh, there was this author called Percival Everett, and like people like Paul Beatty and his back catalogue, and that I, if I'd known about them in my early 20s, then that would have been amazing. But they didn't, like, you didn't have as much stuff being advertised on social media, but also they didn't get as much pushed through their publishers as like Paul Auster, who I just roll my eyes at. So there's that, and also like film is interesting. Like I do work on film and TV, but I feel like I can only really work on them with specific projects, because film and TV are really collaborative. So like the moment you finish a draft of something and give it to someone else, like it becomes
theirs then, right?
Like your vision mixed with their notes, and then when you then give it to then say the set designer, it looks like the set designer's version of what you want, and then you give it to the director, and the director might ask the actors to make choices, and you might have envisaged him casting John Boyega and Gillian Anderson, but he'll cast like Steve Coogan and Pat Butcher or what have you, and like, so like it's constantly compromising, I think, and so like I feel like I can only really do that with certain things, whereas some stories I just want to retain control of it. I want to retain control of the universe. I want to like envelope you into the universe. But also maybe Meat Space and the one who wrote Destiny, like the structural storytelling mechanics of them, it's hard to do it on screen anyway. Like Meat Space is kind of like my way of kind of doing like one of those classic epistolary novels, kind of like Dracula, which wouldn't work. And then like I was really inspired by NW, like the structure of NW by Zadie Smith, and actually reading that was the thing that kind of unlocked what needed to be done with this novel I'd been trying to write since I was 19. And it just, for me, it just feels slightly too unwieldy to imagine it on the screen.
I mean, that's fair enough. Should we go into the meat of it then? So Nikesh, what's your fool's gold? What's out there in pop culture that you absolutely hate that everyone else absolutely loves?
Morrissey. The Smiths.
Oh my god, I hate the Smiths.
There's a lot of other stuff as well, but I guess Morrissey and the Smiths are like, I have this real conflict in my head, and I remember it sort of. I was on a panel with Ned Bowman last year or the year before, and we were recommending books, and he was talking about an Ernest Hemingway book that he really liked, and someone else on the panel said that they really hated Ernest Hemingway, and he went into a really long spiel about how infantile it was to not be able to divorce the artist and their art.
Okay.
And that kind of stuck with me, and it's something that I've wrestled with for a really long time, because like for the longest time I've always felt like, well, if I don't like the person, then they're cancelled and I can't enjoy their work.
Yeah.
But then you get to the point where like you can't really enjoy anything.
I mean, we're going through that now, aren't we?
Yeah. And someone, so a friend of mine called Carl Anker, who's a really great writer, said a really sensible thing. He was like, where the work and the artist are so inextricably linked, it's really hard to divorce them. So you take Morrissey's like comments about nationalism and how the Chinese are a subspecies, and
Jesus Christ,
the lyric in the song Bengalian Platforms, where he goes, it's hard enough when you belong here. And you then look at like all the nationalistic imagery and you go, well, the stuff that I really hate about him and the art are so linked in that way. Like he does sort of flirt with like national identity imagery all the time, and that stuff I really, really can't abide. Like, can't bring myself to even enjoy the musicality of it, because he's saying in his lyrics that I don't belong here, and then he's saying in his interviews that I don't belong here. And so like his solo stuff, not interested. But then you kind of go back to the Smiths and you go, his voice fucking sucks, man. Like, it's terrible.
Yeah,
like,
it really does.
It doesn't sound pleasing to the ear in the same way that Frank Ocean sounds pleasing to your ear, Prince sounds pleasing to your ear, David Bowie sounds pleasing to your ear, but his voice does not sound pleasing in any way. So I just don't know how anyone can enjoy the Smiths. Like, I get the music, and the thing about the music is it really doesn't age very well. Like the Stone Roses album doesn't age well, and so I feel like it's a nostalgia thing that. Yeah, it's a real nostalgia thing with him, that like people heard the Smiths' lyrics about being an outsider at a very pivotal time in their lives.
Yeah,
but I didn't, because I was listening to rap because I'm cool. No, I'm not cool. So I was really not a cool teenager in the slightest. I was I still am very uncool, but yeah. So like I can't listen to it now and have any like it resonate with me in any way, and so I just find it sucks. So whenever I speak out against Morrissey, people will always go, yeah, but what about the Smiths, man? I'm like, no, they suck. Music sucks. They like it. So yeah, that's my fool's gold, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's totally fair. Like, I had so many people who discovered it in university. So many of my friends who loved the Smiths, and I just didn't, because it sounded bad, right? Like, I mean, I got the sort of, but I'm mopey, and I think there's a point where you're supposed to grow out of that. Like, nostalgia's not enough. I was talking to someone recently, actually, about how I've just realised that I don't like Nirvana anymore. Like, I used to love them because I discovered them when I was 15. Whereas now, like, they just make me sad and angry. There's no positive beauty to that music to me now.
Yeah, like, I can't listen to OK Computer anymore.
Right.
Like, it was my favourite album for years and years and years, but I can't listen to it anymore because I'm not that person. I will still herald it as a really important album to me. But it's interesting thinking about, like, in the same few years, I was rinsing Ruffy's Revenge by Asian Dub Foundation, the Black Star album, like Mos Def and Talib Kweli are Black Star, and OK Computer, because they were all sort of roughly out around the same sort of time. I can still listen to those last two albums endlessly, and like at least once a year I'll get into a reel, all I can listen to is that Black Star album again and again and again. But with OK Computer, I can't do it. I don't know what it is. I don't know why that album dates more than the other two, and I think it's probably because of the sort of the pre-millennial tension that was in it. Like, and that maybe that feels. I don't know if it feels dated now, but it feels of its time a lot more.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I've never... it's a big contention between me and my wife is that she loves Radiohead. It's just never... I missed it. All right, then, so let's talk about something sort of happier. Your hidden gem, that thing that's out there that you love that is not widely known or it's underrated.
Writers of colour who write fiction. In general, we need more love. No, so there's a writer called Akhil Sharma.
Okay.
Who wrote a novel called Family Life, which won the Folio Prize the second year it ran, and it's Family Life is an incredible book, and it's basically the story of it's just like the most delicate immigrant story I've ever read. You know, I read a lot of like writers of colour, and that kind of ends up being what they're writing from. But it's just something he does brilliantly. So he wrote a novel, a debut, and then there's 7 years passed, and then nothing was coming from it. And then this novel just suddenly came out, and it's very short. And apparently, like he'd sat down to write a new novel, and he ended up writing his life story, and it was running to like 700 pages. So it was just sprawling, and he just did this thing where he kind of pared it back to its bare bones, and what remains is like, you know, it's very rare you get books where they're so precise that there isn't a word out of place, you know. And that's the thing with novels, like there's a lot of wasted words in a lot of novels, even the great ones. But with that novel, it's every sentence is as it should be. It's a real masterclass in conciseness and like the space between the words telling you as much as the words themselves. So I think he's really underrated. And then because his short story collection came out this year in 2017, and it's called this is how underrated it was. The name of it has gone out of my brain. It's called like a life of adventure and delight. And I mean, one of the cover quotes compares him to Chekhov, which I think is great, but I would say he's like, everything about it is like everything that you love about, like, say, Alice Munro or Dorothy Parker, or even like shades of Raymond Carver. It's just, yeah, he's just brilliant at thoughtful, big writing that's really unfussy. And yeah, he's great. He's an interesting guy. Like, he wants to. This was way before the Trump election, but I emailed him. I was a big like celebrator of his work, and he once emailed me out of the blue just to say thank you for like singing the praises of the book. And then I when he won the Folio, I phoned him up to congratulate him. And then I was in New York a few months later. I was like, hey, do you want to meet for a cup of coffee? And he said, no, I'm going to buy you lunch. We went for lunch in Trump Tower. Oh, wow. And this is way before either of us really thought that we'd end up. He was just like a kooky dickhead millionaire, right? Yeah. And the name didn't really mean much to me. I think I can't remember where we were in the birtherism stuff. But yeah, he's just a really, really thoughtful person. And I really think he should be more widely read, basically. I think he's amazing. So amazing.
Wow, okay. Yeah, I mean that's what this is for. Actually, so that's brought something up, because I spoke to, on this podcast, Vinay Patel, right, who's a contributor on the Good Immigrant. And he mentioned something, and I've got, hopefully, an interview coming with someone who's who'd said very similar things. As people of colour, Vinay was talking about when he was first approached with Murdered by My Father, he didn't want to write that stuff. He didn't want to be, and is that quite a common thing within sort of, creatives of colour? I don't want to be the guy who writes about the brown issues.
Well, I think it's much more complicated than that. Okay. Because you want to have chosen to write about it. You want your palette to be as wide as possible. So I want to I don't want to just be the race and racism guy. Yeah. I want to write a gentrification thriller. I want to write about cities. I want to write about food. I want to write about my love of mid-90s rap.
Yeah.
But where I feel like I have a story to tell that is about racism, I want to write it. And that is, you know, you think about someone like Jonathan Safran Foer, like he has got the freedom to write whatever he wants.
Yeah.
And he does. I want that freedom as well.
Yeah.
And I think there's always like this interesting tension about what gets commissioned.
Right.
So like you can get further along the commissioning process if you've got a story about an honour killing or a radicalisation or an arranged marriage than if I, Nikesh Shukla, said, I've got a great story about a creative writing professor who fucks one of his students and then it's a bit sad for 400 pages because they'll go, yeah, we've already got one of those. So like it's about, I think true diversity is basically writers of colour getting to write whatever they want.
Yeah.
Or like having the freedom to write whatever they want. And like it is complicated because like if I then choose to write about racism, then people will go, oh, you were just complaining that you only get to write about it. And I'll go, yes, but I made a choice. I made a conscious choice rather than it was the only thing I was ever commissioned for. And I do think that, you know, it is, when I think about 2017 in terms of the books that came out that were prominently by writers of colour, you had Gary Young, no, that's unfair, not Gary Young's, but Rennie Edo-Lodge's book and the Change Is Gonna Come anthology and the Good Immigrant. You know, these are all books that are about race, right?
Yeah.
And they're the ones that got commissioned, and while they are all equally valid and needed, and it's important that they came out, like where's our sci-fi writers and our crime writers? Like there's like a really good undercurrent of up and coming like crime writers like Imran Mahmood and A.A. Dand and Abir Mukherjee and a couple of other people. So, you know, why aren't they getting the column inches and all that kind of stuff? So like I completely get why Vinay would have been really reticent at first, and then I completely get why he would have then gone, okay, if maybe there's a way of doing this in a way that I feel comfortable doing it. And I'm glad he did it, because when I knew he was doing it, a part of me was a bit like, oh my God, not another thing about honour killing. But then like he was like, trust me, watch it. When it comes out, watch it. And he'd really done the work with it, and it felt different from other things that kind of...
Yeah. Well, yeah, one of the things he said, it says in the podcast, is like in the process he told them, like, I think this should be funnier than you think it should be. And I think there's
yeah, and so like that raises an interesting point about gaze, like what gaze stories are told through and whose gaze they're for. And so when you think about, you know, I think a really good example about for this is like I've been in script meetings when I've written stuff for TV where people have needed me to have a white person in there so that audiences have someone to identify with, and I'm like, why can't they identify with? And because the common assumption by the commissioners is that people don't, and because the commissioners think that, it self-perpetuates, and then it gets ingrained in culture that you can't identify with someone unless they look just like you. And that's not true, because like I grew up, my biggest hero was Peter Parker. Like I'd obviously love for there to be more people who look like me on TV, because, you know, I know I'm taking this to like two extreme examples. On like the thin end of the wedge of all this stuff around white supremacy, you have like the Ghostbusters film that came out last year or 2 years ago, and how mad the internet got that they'd recast all the Ghostbusters with female actors. And so you had this preposterous situation where, you know, people were willing, and it was because it was a sacred cow for like a lot of these nerds, and like every film is made for the gaze of like straight white men aged 10 to 60 or what have you.
All media is for me, I'm well aware.
and like, so like these people were mad because they can suspend their disbelief enough for a world where there are ghosts that exist and they need busting, but they can't suspend their disbelief enough for the thought like that women can bust ghosts. And then who got the majority of the trolling online. It was Leslie Jones, the black woman, and you just go, well, that tells a tale about acceptable spaces, like for a lot of people, and who people can and can't identify with, and that needs to change. And then at the thick end of the wedge of that, you have these men walking through Charlottesville carrying tiki torches, shouting things like, "You will not replace us," and diversity equals white genocide, because the thought that the thought that we want to create an equal playing field where we're all judged equally, for these people who are overrepresented, they feel that it's a one in one out system. And I don't know who the quote is attributed to. I've tried to find the source, but there's this famous quote that people throw around, like, to the privileged, equality feels like oppression.
Right, yeah.
And so I think it's important in popular culture that, like, we have different gazes.
Yeah.
And people identify with those different gazes. I'm well aware that, like, you can tell... I guess, like, Blue is the Warmest Colour is a good example of, like, a film where the source material was made by someone from a certain community. It's like a lesbian coming of age film, and then graphic novel, and then, like, it was directed by a male director who, like, apparently there was some really like obscenely problematic ways he directed the sex scenes to kind of make them really explicit and male gazy, and
yeah
that sort of stuff just shouldn't happen, so it is important.
No, I completely agree. Alright, so should we wrap up with just some quick fire questions? So
okay.
What's your favourite, your least favourite, different kind of mediums?
Okay,
so your favourite TV show
right now?
Yeah.
The Good Place right now.
Oh, I really like The Good Place. It's a good choice. Your least favourite?
X Factor.
Fair. It's had a few mentions.
That could have been my Fool's Gold, the other one.
Fool's Gold, yeah.
I really hate Twitter on Saturdays.
Right,
In the autumn, because it's like football, X Factor.
Yeah. Alright, your favourite movie?
Don't know. If you'd asked me this like 10 to 15 years ago, I probably would have said Fight Club. But then I've come to realise in the last 7 years, like, the legacy of Fight Club is so fucking toxic. It's one of those things where that and I think Wolf of Wall Street are two films that toxic masculinity has watched and not realised is a satire, and instead is a lifestyle choice, which I think is really interesting.
I was talking about this the other day because it's quite similar to I think the stuff that's going on with Rick and Morty at the moment, and the stuff like Al Murray, the pub landlord, like...
Yeah, he was supposed to be a piss take.
Yeah, like, these things are, like, even those two films, like, they're an examination of toxic masculinity. That's what they are. But there's just guys, the same with Rick and Morty. There's just guys watching it going, "Yep, I want to be that arsehole." And I'm like,
yeah,
I don't understand you.
Favourite film? There's a Bollywood film called Sholay that I really like.
Okay, all right, good. Least favourite. That's where I'm at.
That I've seen all the way through. Like, I've seen a lot of films that I junk. Actually, no, I'm going to change my favourite film. Fast 5. I love that film.
Fast and Furious franchise is phenomenal.
Yeah. 5 and 6 and 7. If they're on at any point, can watch them at any point. Again and again. Least favourite. Oh god. Attack of the Clones, I guess.
Wow, that's the one you pick of those three.
Yeah, it's got the terrible love story stuff that's acted really badly, and some really schlocky Hayden Christensen acting.
Yeah, fair enough.
If you kind of view the first one as a kids' film,
right?
You can understand why it might be the way it is.
Right? Yeah. That's completely fair. Your favourite book? It's always hard.
The Buddha of Suburbia by Hanif Qureshi.
Okay, great. Least favourite?
Freedom by Jonathan Franzen. Fucking hated that book. The Art of Fielding by Chad Harback. I really hated that as well. God. Anything by Charles Bukowski. Freedom by Jonathan Franzen. That book is just the smuggest piece of shit ever. I was so excited about it. Oh, there's there's a sentence that lasts 28 pages. It's fucking tedious. Like, why do we care about these awful rich people? Oh God, I really hated it.
I could tell, yeah.
And what made it worse was all the interviews he did around it, where he was like, if you use the internet while you write, that makes you a prick. Or like, you know, anytime Jonathan Franzen opens his mouth, you go, you're not a nice person. I refuse to have any characters of colour in my book because I'm not friends with any, therefore I can't write any.
Right.
And part of you goes, the most troubling thing about that is like, the fact that you're very aware of your monocultural friendship group. I'm surprised. Firstly, I'm surprised you have any friends because you seem like a massive dickhead. But secondly, like, if you're that aware that like you're surrounded by white people, like, you know, are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Like, fiction aside, like, are you okay with that?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Like. Did he actually say that?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It was more specific than that. I'm paraphrasing. It was much more specific than that. It was something like he can't write black women because he doesn't know any, or it's something like that. It was very specific, but like my takeaway from it was basically that, you know, he has a very monocultural friendship group.
Yeah. Wow. You mentioned Peter Parker. So what's your favourite superhero?
Spider-Man.
Fair.
Obviously.
Yeah. Least favourite?
Superman. It's pretty dull. Pretty worthy.
Yeah, it's very American dreamy.
Yeah.
What do you call it? The sort of golden boy. He's completely invulnerable, so there's no tension ever.
I can't remember where I saw it. It feels like something that probably Kevin Smith, like, was said in a Kevin Smith film, or like something like in a Quentin Tarantino film, you know, where people kind of break from the plot to sort of talk about popular culture. And occasionally it's really good, but someone says that the interesting thing about Superman is that Superman isn't Clark Kent. Clark Kent is what Superman thinks we are, because he is Superman. That is the person. So Clark Kent is a role that he plays. Especially in like the early stuff before it got all dark and gritty, which is like the most tedious thing to happen to superhero films ever, and comics. But and once you kind of look at it that way, that a god is basically playing like an inept man in order to like masquerade as one of us, like, you just go, well, where are the stakes here? Do you know what I mean? There's no stakes in it.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So last question, which I ask everyone: if someone was going to make the story of your life, what medium would you want them to do that in, and what would you call it?
Oh God, like a sitcom that was cruelly cancelled after one season, but the fans are always like, could have definitely gone to 2 seasons or 3 even.
Okay, great. I mean, that's a great answer. What would you call that?
He tried.
He tried.
I don't know.
I mean, that's fair. Thank you very much, Nikesh, for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's been brilliant.
I look forward to the inevitable lawsuit from Jonathan Franzen.
Cheers, mate. Wow, so that was Nikesh. Such a lovely guy, very thoughtful, very eloquent, with great opinions on pop culture. We got quite deep at points in this one, and I'm certainly going to make a point of going out of my way in future to find art that is not pushed and marketed at me and people like me. There were a bunch of artists that Nikesh mentions in passing that I had not heard of, far more than is normal for me. But implications aside, that's quite exciting because it means I'm going to get to do a lot of fun reading. You can find Nikesh's books everywhere. All good bookstores, the internet, go and buy them, and do it soon if you want to catch up, because he doesn't look like slowing down the production of them anytime soon. I'm not going to do a big spiel this week. If you want to support this podcast, you can do it at thatthispod.com. Otherwise, enjoy the holidays. In the next episode, I speak to Alejandra Gutierrez, who's a comic book artist. My first from that medium. It's very exciting. I love comics, and, I've already spoken to her, so I can tell you it's a lot of fun. I'll catch you soon.